Nan Chan by Tang Jiu Qing, Volume 1. Glossary. Nan Chan. Literally translated to Southern Meditation, the title may be a reference to a temple built in 782 CE, located on Mount Wutai in Shanxi Province. The character Chan ultimately derives from the Sanskrit dhyana and is a cognate of the Japanese term Zen. Jinglin. The name Jinglin can be understood as cleansing rain. The character Jing represents cleanliness, and in the context of Buddhism, means to purify or cleanse oneself of secular desires. The character Lin refers to a long rainy spell. Tang Ji. The name Tang Ji alludes to the sky clearing up after a period of rain or snow. The character Tang is a color that covers a large section of the light spectrum, from what is considered green to blue and even gray. It is commonly associated with the sky and the Chinese dragon. The character Ji describes bad weather clearing up or anger dissipating. Inverted scale. Chinese dragons are said to have a scale that grows in the opposite direction on their neck or throat. Depending on the tale, the inverted scale is either very precious to the dragon or is its greatest weakness. Jiejie and Jie, a term that means older sister. It can also be used as a suffix or on its own as a form of address or endearment between kin or non-kin. Guga and Ge, a term that means older brother. It can also be used as a suffix or on its own as a form of address or endearment between non-kin. For example, Jinglin's pet name Jiuge means ninth brother. Chapter 1. What do you see? Blood and carnage. Why have you come? To kill. Jinglin, the true Buddha, lowered his gaze in compassion. Turn back, and salvation is at hand. With cold, detached eyes, Jinglin looked up at the staircase before him, long hair cascading loosely over his body. Crimson soaked the ends of his clothes, and the tip of his sword dragged through the boundless sanguine sea that surrounded him, while countless deities loomed overhead. It's too late, Jinglin murmured. As he set foot upon the stairs, the celestial warriors retreated in unison, falling back a step for each one he took. Everyone remained silent, filled with trepidation in his presence. He was clearly an individual, yet his fellow deities behaved as though they stood against a formidable foe. He sauntered on as if this were an everyday occurrence, as if he were the same old Lord Linsong they knew. Spear in hand, Li Rong, the commander of the celestial warriors, knelt facing the Buddha's lotus pond that had turned murky from the dripping blood. Jinglin, he cried out hoarsely, eyes bloodshot, why must you go this far? Once this deed is done, there will be no place for you in this world. How much hatred and resentment do you harbor? Even if he was at fault, he should be handed over to the court of immortality for punishment. Why won't you speak? Why won't you ever say anything? You are always so hell-bent on going your own way until you end up isolated and forsaken by kith and kin alike. Jinglin. Trembling, Li Rong coughed up blood as he choked on his words. Don't you want to live anymore? Jinglin had already reached the last step. All that was warm and tender had been extracted from him, leaving only a penetrating chill behind. The Buddha faced Jinglin with the flower in his hand, as an assembly of monks behind him chanted sutras in unison. There were so many deities present so as to blot out the sun, but none stood with Jinglin. The blade of his sword hit the ground. He finally halted in his tracks. A large golden coffin without a lid rested horizontally before the Buddha, inside which lay a man sealed under threefold chains, formed with Brahmic script, eyes closed and expression serene as if in deep repose. You've committed a grave sin, yet you persist in your stubbornness. The compassionate Buddha gazed at Jinglin. The Supreme Father is before you, but still, You are unwilling to lay down your blade. Will you desist only once you've gone as far as slaying your father and friends, destroying the virtuous merits you've accumulated throughout your life? Jinglin seemed deaf to his words, however. Reversing his grip on Weeping Spring, he swept the sword across in a horizontal arc. A glow of azure bloomed forth, and the chanting came to an abrupt halt. Immediately, a violent gale roared forth from the azure arc. For a moment, the masses shielded their faces as their bodies faltered in the wind. Only the Buddha stood firm. Jinglin, bow and submit to the enlightened ones. Repent, and you will be absolved of your sins, the merciful Buddha urged. Lotus flowers bloomed all around him as the Buddha's light illuminated every corner, and the chanting of sutras resumed. The celestial warriors bellowed in unison and charged forward. Far in the distance, the bell on the terrace of immortality tolled, and Sheng Yue, the divine lady, appeared to be weeping. Still, Jinglin did not back down. He lunged forward, and a slash of azure merged into the expanse of clinging silver armor. Dark red blood splattered everywhere, painting the clouds crimson as Weeping Spring flashed past like flowing mercury. Unsettled by the stench of blood, some deities retreated, covering their noses and mouths. They gazed at Jinglin in shock and fear, perplexed as to how Lord Linsong, with whom they had seldom associated, would have turned into a god of carnage out of nowhere. Blood trickled down the steps wherever Jinglin passed. He could not hear the words of dissuasion from the bystanders. The only thing occupying his thoughts was the golden coffin. The Buddha sighed, but to Jinglin, it sounded so very far away. When he walked past Li Rong, the latter raised his arm to stop him, but the commander's fingertips only brushed the skirt of Jinglin's robes. At that very moment, the golden glow of the coffin and the crimson clouds intersected, marking the rupture of the two deities' bond. Jinglin! Grief welled up in Li Rong's heart. Scrambling up, he reached out to give chase, but his wounded body was weighed down by heavy armor. He could only watch as Jinglin left him behind, disappearing into the golden light. The Buddha lowered a finger as the azure light from Weeping Spring burst forth. As violent winds rampaged, the sword pierced through the chains to decapitate the man in the coffin. The next moment, a boundless sea of blood billowed forth. Together, the four lords of the court cast a seal, and the realm shook so violently the horizon rippled. Starlight gathered, and Brahmic letters spun around as the golden light formed a hurricane. The chanting of the monks quickened, encircling Jinglin. Having fulfilled his wish, he threw the severed head down the stairs and slowly turned to look back. Li Rong's face was awash with tears. Finally, he received Jinglin's reply. "Don't you want to live anymore? Now that it has come to this, what need is there for me to live?" In a flash, Li Rong saw Jinglin outflanked and annihilated along with the azure glow. Lord Linsong was no more. His past scattered to the winds, eventually fading away into nothingness. A gold and red carp lounged inside a porcelain jar, appearing extremely bored, unwilling to even move. When a few flakes of snow drifted in through the window of the bedchamber, however, it swished around in a circle before touching a snowflake with its mouth. The cool sensation took it by surprise, and it sank into the water, shaking its head in confoundment. It played on its own for a while, but it still felt lonesome, so it floated up again to gaze at the individual who was sleeping fully clothed on the wooden bed. The fish had never seen another being besides Jinglin, so it did not know of the beauty standards of this world. Nevertheless, it often watched Jinglin in fascination, the fun of the day condensed into one moment. Its eyes were wanton as they examined his face, glimpsing the romantic charm that colored his features. Yet, when Jinglin was awake, his face would take on a completely contrasting degree of frostiness, giving off a sense of alienation not unlike fragrant blossoms cased in ice. Fortunately, Jinglin seemed to be injured and spent most of his days asleep. The carp observed him until it noticed that the snowfall was growing heavier. More snow was coming in through the window, but the sleeping beauty was still oblivious as a snowflake landed and gradually melted on his forehead. The carp felt crossed as it watched this unfold. It had accompanied Jinglin for so many months, but had never gotten close to him, yet today it had been beaten by an audacious snowflake. On what grounds? The carp swatted at the porcelain loudly, stirring up the water, and leapt above the surface, splashing water out of the jar. The din caused Jinglin to open his eyes, brows slightly knit. After a moment, he turned towards the porcelain jar, just in time to see the fish flop back in, sending another splash of water out and leaving more puddles on the table. It thought Jinglin should get up and pacify it now, but the latter merely looked askance and pointed a finger at it before closing his eyes again to sleep. That one move fixed the fish in place, denying it even a flick of its tail, and leaving it floating stiffly near the surface. It opened its mouth, wanting to cry out, but only bubbles would emerge. Growing cross, it made up its mind to ignore Jinglin for the next few days. No matter how much Jinglin tried to engage, it would not pay him any mind. Jinglin slept until the next morning. After he got dressed, he still looked exhausted. The fish, on the other hand, had been stuck in the same position for the entire night. "I'm going to ignore him" soon turned into "farewell, once and for all, for we are strangers from this point onward." Unfortunately, Jinglin could neither hear nor understand it. When he poured out some feed into his palm, the fish could move anew. Immediately, it tossed aside its earlier thoughts and chased after the food and gobbled it up. Then it even rubbed itself against the man's fingertips, acting docile. Jinglin had such a fair complexion that the fish feared he might melt at the touch like snow, a thought further spurred by his listless expression. He did not seem to have his heart in the moment, but then again, he might not have had a heart to begin with, that he could fall asleep any time and not awaken again. Worried that he might actually melt, it nibbled on his fingertip, curious to feel him. The fish was surprised to find that the flesh was cold to the touch, and also extremely soft and smooth. So astounded it was that it nibbled him a few more times, until Jinglin was brought back to his senses by the tickle on his extremities. Looking down, he stirred the water a little. "Still hungry?" As soon as he spoke, the wintry winds in the walkway came to a momentary rest. The fish swam around his fingertips, rolled over, and gazed expectantly at him. Jinglin understood and turned his gaze to the window. The snow was falling so heavily that it was inadvisable to venture outdoors. Yet rather than conform to common sense, he stepped outside. A pile of snow at the bottom of the steps shook apart, revealing a small stone figure. On all fours, the figure clambered over the threshold, hoisted the porcelain jar over its head, and staggered out in pursuit of Jinglin, who had walked into the snow. Jar balanced on its head, the figure followed in his wake, and as if wary, the snow dancing all over the sky avoided landing on either of them. The fish was initially in low spirits because the man once again chose not to carry it in his arms, but at the sight of the sky gray with flurries, and the courtyard grounds blanketed in white, it cast that petty dejection away and bobbed about in excitement. Having stayed in the bedchamber all this while, the fish rarely saw the scenery outside. Only when Jinglin was in a very good mood would they venture out. This was the first time it had seen snow outside, and its enthusiasm was palpable. It got carried away, leaping about so much that the jar wobbled precariously. The stone figure staggered, struggling for balance in the snow, and eventually fell along with the jar. Fortunately, the jar remained intact after slipping over the ground, but the carp went flying. Its red and gold body traced an arc mid-air and plunged headlong into the snow. Only its tail could be seen flapping violently against the snow in panic, but only for a moment until it was picked up by its tail. The fish had originally planned to put on a meek and aggrieved act in order to garner sympathy, but when it recognized the young, handsome face of Ah Yi, it immediately began to struggle in indignation. Ah Yi revealed a mouthful of sharp teeth. "Jinglin, can I have this plump fish? I'm sure it'll make a delicious meal, stewed or braised." Jinglin stopped in his tracks and looked back. "Give it back." The stone figure climbed to its feet. Holding onto the crushed grass crown on its head, it chased after Ah Yi to get the carp back. Ah Yi swung the fish by its tail in mid-air on purpose, laughing. "Come take it if you can. You're so dull, Jinglin. Always sleeping. Why don't you come down the mountain and join me for some fun? The middle realm is vast and so much more fun. It's completely different from heaven. I guarantee that you'll be dazzled and lose yourself in the moment." If there was someone the carp hated the most, that honor would go to Ah Yi, a 5-colored bird spirit of the Canli tree who often shapeshifted into a human to play in Jinglin's courtyard. Every time he came, he would be sure to drool over the carp and make all sorts of friendly overtures towards Jinglin. Being swung around in the air made the carp dizzy, but it flew into a rage when it heard Ah Yi attempting to lure Jinglin down the mountain again, though it was powerless against the bird spirit. The stone figure kicked Ah Yi in the calf, causing the bird to clutch at his leg in pain. The carp seized the chance to break free. The stone figure caught hold of the fish and turned tail, but this carp was so plump that the figure could only carry half of it, leaving the remaining half trailing in the snow as it dashed away. Head dragged along the ground, the fish was getting smothered by the snow. Not even bubbles were coming out from its mouth now that it was being knocked around so much it could not see straight. When Jinglin picked it up, the fish was still limp and looking pitiful. Jinglin watched it until it opened its mouth feebly, and he sent it into the interspatial dimension in his sleeve. The carp immediately brimmed with life now that it could catch its breath, surrounded by an abundance of spiritual energy. It nestled close to Jinglin, feeling indescribably at ease. This was why it must rely on, cling to, and monopolize Jinglin. As long as it remained close to him, Jinglin's spiritual energy would sustain it. Although it still did not understand the implications, it was addicted to the feeling of being nourished. The spiritual energy was much more delicious than the feed it was given, leaving it voracious for more. It could not even have its fill, so how could it allow anyone else to catch even a whiff of it? Thus, it classified anyone who approached Jinglin as a potential thief, here to steal his food source, thereby earning them its deep hostility. As the carp feasted, it listened in on the conversation between Ah Yi and Jinglin. "Can't we leave the mountain? You keep hanging around here. 1 century, 5 centuries. It's still all the same. You must be lonely." Hands pillowed behind his head, Ah Yi kicked at the snow. "Are you like this too in heaven?" "What's it to you?" the carp thought derisively. Belt sash fluttering in the wind, Jinglin returned a question. "Why have you come?" "Do I need a reason to visit you? Is that how you think of me?" Ah Yi retorted. "How hurtful." "He who has no wish visits not the temple." Jinglin's voice was colder than the wind. Ah Yi could not bear the iciness and hurriedly pulled his overcoat closer around himself. He buried his chin in the fur, revealing only his rather androgynous eyes. When he looked up at Jinglin again, he went for a softer tone. "Jinglin Goga, there's a spirit residing in the east who bullied me, but I couldn't beat it in a fight. Can you teach it a lesson for me? There's no need to kill it. Just break its limbs so that it'll listen to my orders from now on. Please." Jinglin paused in his steps and cast a sidelong stare at Ah Yi. The bird spirit backed up under the weight of the gaze, feeling as if he was not facing a man-sized individual, but a slinking behemoth. He sweated nervously and could barely maintain his composure, but he gave a light grunt and kicked at the snow again, bracing himself. "Will you help me or not?" Jinglin eyed him coolly. "Does breaking someone's limbs please you so?" There was a chill in Ah Yi's heart as fear inexplicably seized him. He clutched his cloak tightly, too scared to answer. Jinglin ignored him and walked away. Ah Yi remained where he was and gnashed his teeth, not understanding how he had offended Jinglin. He did not even want that spirit dead. He merely wanted to break its limbs. So what did it matter? What about it offended Jinglin so much that he would not even do him this favor? Ah Yi had been spoiled and pampered since he was a chick. His elder sister was the guardian of the Canli tree, who was in charge of the vegetation in the Middle Realm, and she doted on him very much. He always got his way and was accustomed to running amok in the Middle Realm, so how could he have ever learnt to behave? Now that he was denied what he wanted, he stopped pleading with Jinglin, and simply shapeshifted into his bird form and flew away through the snowy air. That night, the carp flanked its porcelain dwelling, motionless, while Jinglin lay fast asleep. The bedchamber was unlit, as was the rest of the residence. With barely a sound, a 5-colored bird flew into the bedchamber and shapeshifted into human form before grabbing the porcelain jar and sneaking out with it. Once out of the courtyard, Ah Yi broke into a flit. The fish was jolted awake by the churning water. Seeing the darkness and the relentless gales all around, it knew it was in peril. "He's always treasured you, so he'll surely follow if I bring you off the mountain." Snorting, Ah Yi tugged at his clothes to cover the jar. "It's fine, even if he doesn't. You've slapped me on the cheek with your tail more than once. If he doesn't want you anymore, I'll throw you into the river and feed you to the spirits." The carp was seething while Ah Yi continued. "Don't play dumb. You think I don't know? You stick to Jinglin so closely only for his spiritual energy. You want to swallow him up to enhance your cultivation and evolve into human form sooner." Stretching out his wings, Ah Yi launched himself high into the clouds. "Do you think Jinglin doesn't know? Fool! Let's see if he even comes for you." The carp leapt with all its might, but the jar was completely blocked by fabric. It sensed itself getting further and further away from Jinglin, and all it could hear was the howling wind. Ah Yi ended up flying the entire night. The carp had eventually calmed down in the cold wind. Submerged in water, it blew bubbles as it contemplated the likelihood of Jinglin waking up after falling asleep. Who knew when he would awaken from hibernation? What if he slept through winter till spring? The fish would be a goner by then. It decided to bide its time for an opportunity to escape. Although Jinglin was fast asleep, the stone figure in the snow awoke. Shaking its head, it rubbed its black, beady eyes and yawned as it began to run. In a moment of inattention, it slipped on the stairs and skidded down the mountain, thud, 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 finally landing on its back with limbs in the air. It sprang to its feet and adjusted its grass crown before breaking off a withered branch to use as a crutch, limping as it headed in the direction where Ah Yi had flown off. The carp awoke with a start. The cloth covering the jar had been removed. It zipped to the edge of the jar, only to discover an unfamiliar sight. Ah Yi munched on grapes as he cocked his chin. "Go on, take a look. I bet you don't know where we are, stupid fish." He flashed a wicked smile. "This is an incredibly deep ice pool on the coast of the East Sea, and an evil sea serpent lay at the bottom in exile. It hasn't eaten for many years. It's so hungry it'd eat anything, even humans, let alone a small fry like you. You wouldn't even be a snack." Considering its own figure, the carp felt it could still be a decent snack, but it did not want to be one even if it could. Thus, it looked at the bird spirit with a blank face. imagining a future where it could shapeshift into a human. It would pluck out all of the brat's tail feathers, hang his true form upside down, and make him wander around the world with his bare ass hanging out. However, Yi could only see the fish staring blankly and looking extraordinarily silly, so he threw a grape at it and leaned in to scrutinize it. Ornamental carps all look alike, but I doubt Jinglin would rear one at random. Are you from heaven? If you are, then you must be a spy. Since Lord Chengtian set up boundaries between the three realms and established a strict hierarchy of ranks, the status of the Court of Immortality has never been higher. He even trampled over our land, the Middle Realm, and set up the Demarcation Bureau to surveil us. At this point, anyone who descends to the mortal realm must be a mole. So, are you a mole, or are you a mole? The carp let out a snort while Yi smacked it again. Why are you so dumb? You've stayed by Jinglin's side for so long, but you can't even speak. You're clearly stupid. You're a fool, all right. You're the fool. Your whole family are fools. The carp silently insulted, although it continued to put on a naive act as it watched the bird spirit from the water. Yi found it boring. The fish would not fight back when hit or talk back when scolded. It was no fun at all. Yi sat cross-legged on a stone and waited until he ran out of patience. Since it was already noon, and Jinglin had yet to come, he must not have cared. Thus, Yi jumped off the stone and raised a leg to push the jar to the edge of the pool. You've hit me 3 times, Yi touched his cheek. I've been keeping count, you know. I took it without complaint on Jinglin's account, but it bothers me that you've witnessed my humiliation. How can I let you live when you've seen me in my sorry state? Well, Jinglin doesn't care anyway. Even if he did, all I have to do is plead with my sister later, and he'll have to let me off the hook. Yi kicked the jar over the edge of the chilly pool. The carp fell into the water and sank. The bird spirit felt a little uneasy and muttered to himself, hands clasped behind his back. I'm not at fault here. I gave Jinglin time, but he was the one who didn't come. Such is the fate of a foolish creature. The carp noticed the unusually cold temperature as soon as it entered the water. The pool was enclosed on 3 sides, so it tried to sink down a little more, but was forced back up by the bottomless darkness. Having developed some spirituality, it could sniff out a massive creature looming underneath. Alas, such was its fate. The carp stayed motionless against the rock. It had not seen any vegetation where it had passed. Although it remained fixed in position, it still felt that it was being watched. With everything swallowed up by darkness below, it might not be able to detect if something were to swim up. It had never been so afraid since it gained consciousness. After approximately 4 hours, the sky had grown dark. The fish was glad that the red and gold of its body was obscured by gloom, but it could not remain here for long. The sea serpent's aura was vaguely oppressing, putting it ill at ease. After making a round trip along the rock, the carp discovered no other openings on any side. It was evident that whoever had sealed away the sea serpent had put effort into selecting the location. Unable to leave the water, it could only wait for an opportunity to present itself. Looking up at the stars reflected upon the water, it felt even colder. Only now did it realize the benefits of staying indoors. Even though Jinglin liked keeping the window open, it had never been this cold before. The fish felt so unbearably hungry that even waiting had become a tedious task. The carp thought that Jinglin might have not yet awakened, but even if Jinglin had woken up, would he really come for it? Jinglin had never smiled at it or hugged it to bed. He would only occasionally get up to play with it after waking up from his naps. Even that stone figure was probably worth more than itself to Jinglin, but it still wanted to remain by Jinglin's side. Because it wanted to devour Jinglin. It frequently observed how Jinglin would frown and sweat in his sleep, and had often seen Jinglin sitting alone in the walkway. It did not know if anyone else in this world was as solitary as Jinglin, but it understood that Jinglin had not recovered from his serious injuries, and that sleep was merely a cover. As long as it could devour Jinglin, It could skip over a century of painstaking cultivation it would have to otherwise go through. Since it had already developed a consciousness, it was no longer satisfied with remaining in the water. Its desires grew continually as its spiritual energy increased. It wanted to leave its vessel, to lean over and gnaw apart Jinglin's exquisite neck one of these nights. Possess him. Dominate him. The carp was so lost in thought it completely missed the silent approach of the shadowy figure from below. When it turned around, it was confronted by two large golden eyes staring straight at it. The sea serpent's body, covered in sapphire blue scales, was only partially visible at this depth. The water rippled gently as the scales glided by slowly, extending endlessly into the darkness, making it nearly impossible to guess the proportions of this creature based on its exposed length. The winter night was still, and the surroundings silent. The carp's nerves were stretched taut. The crushing confirmation of the behemoth's sheer size terrified it, yet a sense of excitement peeked through. Though trembling, it was unequivocally tempted by the serpent's enormous expanse of spiritual energy. The fleshy lumps protruding from the creature's forehead were clear indications that it was close to reaching the status of a flood dragon. Greedily and conceitedly, the carp wondered if it could devour the serpent. The serpent was in no mood to tease its meal. It was so hungry that it snapped open its jaws instantly. Since being subdued in this place, the serpent had not seen any living creature other than the bird who had been disturbing its peace. So, the moment it saw the carp who exuded wisps of spiritual energy, the serpent's only thought was to gulp it down. Realizing the danger it was in, the carp turned and fled, taking advantage of its size to swim swiftly between the coils of the serpent's body. A loud bang sounded as something collided with the rock wall. The serpent was sealed within the pool, which severely limited its movements. This being a crucial period of its evolution, it could not shrink down as it pleased, and could only leave its body to ram against the wall as it slithered past, a violent swing of its tail even causing cracks to appear in the rock. The carp evaded the falling rocks and swam for its life, but the serpent's bulky body occupied much of the space, limiting possible hiding places. The water current shoved it towards a narrow gap, and the serpent wound its body to trap the carp in between. The serpent opened its jaws to swallow its prey, but the carp darted past the sharp edges of its fangs towards the water surface. A few scales were scraped off the fish, but it could not look back. It could only swim upwards with all its strength. A current roiled beneath as the sea serpent catapulted itself forward and caught up to it in the blink of an eye, spreading its massive maw wide open as it sucked the water in. The carp struggled against the current as everything surged in the same direction, and though the surface was closer than ever, the fish was being rapidly pulled back towards the creature's jaws. It was going to be eaten. It had been sucked into the mouth, but when it saw the serpent about to clamp its jaws shut, it desperately strove towards the closing gap with a burst of energy it did not know it had. A pale hand suddenly plunged into the jaws of the serpent and wrenched them open, revealing the carp inside. The fish crashed right into Jinglin's bosom, slipping down his loosened collar, and clung close to his skin, refusing to show itself again. His face a sickly hue, Jinglin pointed a finger between the serpent's eyes, startling it for a moment. It put on a fearful front, allowing Jinglin to turn away from it, but the next moment, it revealed its true colors by pouncing on him for a bite. Jinglin's spiritual energy was only skin-deep, a pretense that could intimidate ordinary spirits, but it was ineffective in the face of a serpent on the cusp of evolving into a flood dragon. Anticipating this reaction, Jinglin braced a foot against the wall and spun himself around. The sea serpent swung its tail up to obstruct him, but Jinglin dodged and stepped across it, taking advantage of the tail's momentum to propel himself out of the water. The serpent followed him partially out of the water, revealing its terrifyingly thick and powerful body, and snapped its jaws after him. Out of nowhere, the seal over the pool glowed brightly and bore down on the sea serpent, forcing it back into the water. Jinglin came ashore with a huge splash and tossed the carp towards the stone figure waiting by the side. Looking up as it ran, the figure caught the fish and tumbled into the snow with it. The carp waited for it to get up, but there was no movement for a long time. Glancing over, it discovered that the figure was covered in frost, and its movements were sluggish. Jinglin's hair was loose, and his drenched white clothes clung to his body. He wrapped a dark blue wide-sleeved robe over his upper body and tied the sash loosely around his waist. The water droplets on his pale neck slid slowly down his collarbone, merging with the color of his skin. Jinglin covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He was thin and frail, and he looked even more feeble amidst the harsh, frozen landscape. "Let's go," he murmured before turning to go home. The next moment, he realized something was amiss, so he looked back again. There was no carp, only a plump little boy, fair and delicate, sitting in the snow. The carp lowered its head and turned pale with fright when it caught sight of its chubby arms resembling lotus roots. Without thinking, it ran straight at Jinglin, throwing itself into his arms while tightening its own around the larger being's neck. It stuck its face against Jinglin's cheek while crying out with imprecise enunciation, Ji Li. Jinglin recoiled. Having not been in intimate contact with anyone for centuries, he was at a loss. The carp latched onto Jinglin's neck, tears pouring down in torrents as it stared helplessly at Jinglin, and the latter felt a throbbing in his temples as his long-absent headache returned. The carp took advantage of this opportunity to cling innocently to Jinglin. The icy cool feeling of his neck made it reluctant to loosen its hold. It had been so frightened by this encounter that it had evolved into human form. His psyche had yet to fully develop, so he had only learned to somewhat mimic an innocent expression. He leaned on Jinglin like a warm mass melting against Jinglin's chest, and the sensation hit Jinglin so abruptly that it felt as if he had been transported to another time. Jinglin turned his head away and furrowed his brows. The carp blinked and tried to puzzle out his expression. Ji Li, home. He could not articulate his words clearly, but it was clear that he was imitating speech, albeit clumsily. Jinglin could allow a fish to stay with him, but he could not let a human do so. His emotions and worldly desires had been wholly cut off centuries ago, and he had neither loved nor had any desire to learn how to love another entity since. Social relationships had tormented him greatly, and he had paid a heavy price because of it. If there did exist an emotion he ever understood, then it would have to be hate. In the name of hate, he had unhesitatingly taken up a blade and started a bloodbath. Therefore, he could not help but shudder in the face of this warm dependence. The carp did not know how to dress, so he simply wrapped himself in Jinglin's loose robes. Most of it dragged across the floor as he ran barefoot along the walkway. A copper bell below the eaves swayed in the wind, and the messy-haired carp skipped and hopped between each chime. The stone figure chased after him, catching the train that trailed on the ground as the carp dashed to the end of the walkway, where a small pond lay next to an ancient maidenhair tree. He crouched down and stirred the water with his hands, shivering at the freezing temperature. "So this is what it's like to be a human," the carp mumbled to himself. Overnight, he had learned to speak much more fluently. The stone figure kicked him on the buttocks, and the carp, caught unawares, fell over in a kneeling position on the wooden plank. Rather than get angry, he giggled, raising his palms and studying them intently. "So this is what it's like to fall." He had learned to run only a short while ago. Before this, he did not know what to do other than lie on the ground and swish his tail. He needed to get used to using his limbs instead of fins. Sitting cross-legged, he gathered the loose robe tightly around himself. His fair, chubby feet were red from the cold. Lowering his head, he buried it under the collar to observe his own body. Then he popped his little head out again. He muttered to the stone figure, "I never knew humans had a fifth limb. How strange." The stone figure could not speak, so it squeezed its head in beside the carp's and followed his gaze for a brief moment. It could see the confusion on the carp's face, but it did not know how to explain it to him either. The carp grabbed hold of the stone figure, looked under it, and asked curiously, "Why don't you have it, Stony?" Furiously ashamed, Stony hid its face with its hands and kicked the carp, who bared his teeth at once and threatened, "If you kick me again, I'll throw you away, and you'll never see Jinglin again." Stony hastily retreated before turning to run inside. Fearing that Stony would tattle, the carp hurriedly got up in pursuit of it. As Jinglin was resting, the carp moved lightly on entering the house. After they had returned the previous night, Jinglin coughed through most of the night and only fell asleep close to dawn. The carp stepped onto a low table and climbed onto a chair before jumping onto the bed and kneeling beside Jinglin's pillow. Jinglin's face was even paler than it had been the night before. Like a chronically sick person, he spent more time bedridden than not. His inky hair spilt over the pillow like a black waterfall. The carp carefully scooped up a handful, but the strands spilt through between his fingers. Mustering up his courage, he leaned in to listen to Jinglin's breathing. He touched his fingers to Jinglin's cheeks and neck, but withdrew them in astonishment, only to stretch his digits out again to probe him in disbelief. Warm. Jinglin was warm, and he felt smooth to the touch. This differed entirely from what the carp had known before. Did it mean that even one's sense of touch could change after evolving? The carp lay down beside Jinglin. Upon some observation, he realized something different about him. He had never looked at Jinglin from this angle before. He had never known that Jinglin's nose was so straight, his lips so thin, and that he was so beautiful, like a piece of exquisite porcelain that would shatter at a touch. The carp pinched his own nose and felt his own cheeks. He did not have to be better than Jinglin, because the world only needed one of Jinglin. He just had to be stronger and more powerful than Jinglin. He suddenly felt a pain in his back. He glanced back and saw Stony sitting at the edge of the bed, eyeing him with a sour look. Scoffing, the carp drew closer to Jinglin and nudged Stony away with his foot, but it clung to his calf, trying to drag him off the bed. Panicked, the carp turned around to grab onto the front of Jinglin's clothes and wrapped his arms around Jinglin's neck, refusing to let go. Stony stomped its feet in frustration, but the carp ignored it. He was so close to Jinglin that he was absorbing the latter's spiritual energy without even realizing it. Jinglin was nearly depleted of spiritual energy, and that which remained was erratic. His brows gradually came to a furrow, seeming as if he could not bear his spiritual energy leaching away. For some reason, Stony stopped moving, turning into two rocks and rolling aside. For a long time, Jinglin did not wake up. The carp gulped. This was a good opportunity to devour him. Jinglin's consciousness drifted aimlessly atop the empty stone platform, a solitary shadow journeying alone with no known destination. The restoration of his ruined form had been slow, and the radiant lights of his soul had been scattered in all directions, struggling to take human form. His breathing was labored as if someone held him by the throat, and his chest felt heavy like something was pinning him down, making him feel even more exhausted. Even so, he instantly opened his eyes when the wind rose under the eaves. The first thing his eyes saw was a fuzzy head pressed against his cheek. The carp slept soundly while hugging him tight. Jinglin stared at the roof and closed his eyes as he breathed out. By the time his eyes opened again, he had regained his composure. "What is it?" He sounded emotionless as usual. Someone kneeling in the walkway responded meekly. "My willful brother Yi has disturbed your lordship from your solitary cultivation. The magnitude of his transgressions warrants death. I am here to plead guilty to his crime, my lord. Please punish him as you deem fit." Jinglin was silent for a moment before the identity of the visitor came to him. "I am not your lord." She remained silent for a moment before declaring, "It is a known fact that I was under the command of Lord Linsong of the Court of Immortality. Even if the Tanli tree is now under the jurisdiction of the Demarcation Bureau, My heart remains like a monolith, firm and unswerving." She straightened up to face the door before bowing down once more. "Do not call me your lord." Jinglin spat each word with aversion tinged with frost. The maiden outside was quiet for a long time before calling out timidly, "Jioge." Jinglin felt smothered, his hands and feet chilled. He covered his eyes as his throat bobbed, chest heaving unsteadily as he suppressed the urge to cough up blood. "Stop it." His gaze was obscured in a shadow from which he could never break free. The cry of Jioge, a pet name from the bygones, was like a bramble of thorns, pricking him all over and leaving him drenched in blood. The maiden beyond the door took mere moments to collect herself. Although her eyes reddened, her voice remained steady. She took out her brother, the bound Ah Yi, thrashing about on the ground in his original bird form. "I've spoiled Ah Yi by pampering him at home. That's why he behaves with such arrogance and willfulness. Since he's made a mistake, he must bear the consequences. I will now hand him over to you, Jioge. Whether he lives or dies is for you to decide." She kowtowed again before making to leave. Witnessing this, Ah Yi thumped his head on the ground until it bled. He glared at his sister Fu Li, but could not cry as he wanted. Just as Fu Li was about to descend the stairs, her feet came to a halt. "I know you don't want to see me." Fu Li let her lashes droop for a moment before looking up at the night sky. "But I'm content knowing that you're alive. On that day, when the Buddha raised his finger and heaven shook, I was overwhelmed with grief hearing that you'd been annihilated. No matter what they say, you'll always be my Jioge. Although I do not know of the feud between you and your father, I refuse to believe that you're such a bloodthirsty man. Jioge, you're mistaken. Killing him was a long-time wish of mine. It was not because of principles or righteousness. I wanted to kill him, so I did. It has nothing to do with you. I'm not your Jioge. Lord Linsong was annihilated at the Terrace of Immortality, and the person you see now is nothing but a dead man. Take your brother away. Scram." Ah Yi did not care about Lord Linsong or Jioge. The only thing he heard was Jinglin telling his sister to scram, and it made him seethe with anger. There were no other 5-colored birds left in the Tanli tree by the time he was born. Fu Li was not only his elder sister, but also a mother figure to him. He may have been a jerk and a bully, but he could not tolerate anyone bad-mouthing her. Ah Yi managed to break his lips free and lashed out in anger. "Jinglin, who do you think you are, telling her to scram? You're just a sickly invalid hiding in the mountains. You don't scare anyone. A mere sea serpent rendered you bedridden, so get off your high horse. You're nothing more than—" Fu Li turned around and bellowed, "Silence!" The copper bell under the eaves jingled, accompanied by the undulating whistle of the wind through the vast pine forest. The gust sent Ah Yi tumbling out of the walkway and down the mountains. Still bound, Ah Yi could only stubbornly shout into the air, "You'll regret this!" Fu Li was about to speak when the doors of the bedchamber were shut, rejecting even the sound of her voice. In the end, she could not say what she had intended. She simply stood there in silence before eventually departing. As soon as she left, Jinglin fell into a fit, coughing up blood. Stony stuffed a handkerchief into his palm, which Jinglin used to cover his mouth and wipe away the bloodstains before questioning, "Still not getting up?" The carp cautiously opened one eye, gave it a rub, and pretended to have been roused from his sleep. Sitting up like a ball of soft dough, he clung to Jinglin's neck and flashed an adorable grin, baring his pearly whites. Jinglin raised a brow and stared imposingly at the carp. One must be quick and ruthless to get his meal. His voice was ice-cold. "You keep dallying. What for?" The blood from earlier left a reddish tinge on his lips. The carp withdrew his hand, appearing frightened. Jinglin raised his head, his chin almost touching the carp's forehead. His eyes were lifeless, as if he were speaking of the life and death of someone else, not his own. "If you miss this opportunity, you'll have to wait a year, a century, perhaps even a millennium." The iciness seeped not from his skin, but his soul. He drew closer to the carp, like a behemoth rising from its sleep, a deterrent far more effective and overwhelming than the baring of sharp fangs. The carp was keenly aware that Jinglin was not his usual self. He tried to shrink back, but Jinglin grabbed him by the arm, pinning him under the behemoth's shadow. It was not the pain that assaulted the carp, but the immense pressure of being towered over and subject to scrutiny. Mounting stress crowded against the vulnerable boundary of his limits, causing him to tremble involuntarily. Jinglin, the carp squeezed out with difficulty. It felt like his organs were being crushed by a large weight, and even his breathing grew ragged. Jinglin watched him for a moment before loosening his grip. As if granting him a reprieve, the carp fell backwards and rolled several times on the blanket. Silence descended upon the bedchamber. The fish was infuriated, but he still wore a pitiful expression on his face. Teardrops tumbled from his eyes as he rubbed the back of his hand and sniveled. Jinglin turned his head and gazed at the evening snow. He sat for a long time, watching disinterestedly before turning back to the carp. "Come here." The carp was wary, but he still crawled back like a small animal. The more obedient he seemed on the surface, the more attuned his heart was to his goal. Hiding in the body of a child, he had attempted to lower Jinglin's guard against him, but to his disappointment, Jinglin seemed to have seen through him and paid it no mind. The carp by his side once more, Jinglin raised his hand as if he meant to stroke the carp's head, but abandoned the action midway, instead reaching over to grab a clean handkerchief from Stony, wiping the snot and tears from the carp's face. Then he lay down again and said nothing more. The next morning, the sky was clear after a night of unceasing snowfall, and the sound of clothes being laundered broke the tranquility. Jinglin summoned an outfit for the carp. Try as he might to push his head against the cuff of a sleeve, the carp could not get his head to fit. Stony grabbed the shirt and helped him put it on before wrapping a velvet cloak around him. A pair of carp were embroidered on his shoes, and he couldn't resist the urge to stroke the threads. Dressed flimsily as usual, Jinglin went down the mountain steps. He took a brief look back, eyes desolate and cold, as Stony led the carp by the hand, following him down the mountain. The area was enveloped by the morning fog, and the steps were so slippery that Stony fell several times. The carp kept a straight face initially, but he then began to scamper about and frolic in the snow with Stony until his head was covered in snow from all the tumbling. Jinglin never looked back, his eyes half-lidded as if in a daydream. At the foot of the mountain, the carp ran a few steps ahead, but when he did not see Stony, he looked back to see it sitting on Jinglin's shoulder, waving its arm at him. Even before he could process what it meant, he heard Jinglin speak. "Goodbye." Stupefied, the carp tilted his head, wondering if he had misheard. But, with a wave of his sleeves, Jinglin turned and began to ascend. The mountain fog now became an eyesore, obstructing the carp's view of him. He snapped to his senses and chased after Jinglin on his stubby legs. Throwing himself on Jinglin's calf, he cried out, "Jinglin!" Jinglin stopped moving and looked askance at him. The carp looked up. It was so cold that he felt stiff. He pleaded, "Jinglin, don't abandon me." "I cannot abandon what wasn't mine." Jinglin flicked his sleeves and moved up the stairs. "Jinglin!" The carp clutched his clothes and whimpered, "Jinglin, I don't want to be away from you. The mountain beasts will catch and eat me." Jinglin remained silent. The carp refused to let go as tears poured down his face. Jinglin was all he could care about, all he could see, as though he had become completely dependent on this individual. However, Jinglin stared back at him with unfeeling eyes. "I want to be with you." The carp choked on his sobs. "You were the one I saw when I first opened my eyes. I don't want to be anywhere else." "You have the gall to say that, knowing who I am? You're Jinglin." Dragged along the ground on his knees, The carp clung desperately to Jinglin's garment as if the fabric was his lifeline. His vocabulary was limited, so he could only repeat the name despondently. "You're Jinglin. Jinglin, don't leave me." This time, the carp's tears were genuine. His life had only just begun, and to him, the world was a strange puzzle, full of complicated yet unspoken rules and conventions that governed relationships. Chapter 2. The carp only understood one thing. He wanted to eat. But even if he wanted to eat Jinglin, he had never thought about leaving him. Would eating Jinglin not be a form of eternal companionship? Such was his logic, and he never found anything wrong with it. Many of his memories as a fish had long been forgotten. His only memories were of Jinglin, the only being he had been with. He was certain that if he were to leave Jinglin's side, he would perish in this endless snow. He could not let go. At least, not until he had devoured Jinglin, the prey he had been eyeing covetously, the meal he had been yearning after. His tightly clenched teeth were proof of his resolve. When Jinglin yanked his sleeve away, the carp suddenly threw himself onto the stairs, smashing his forehead against the edge of a step. He rolled and slid to the ground, feeling warm blood flow past his brows and sting his left eye. Sprawled on the ground, the carp wept in silence. He managed to cover his left eye while looking up at Jinglin, looking as though he was willing to risk everything in exchange for the latter's embrace. The blood flowed past his red, frozen fingers. He trembled as he called timidly, "Jinglin." Jinglin's expression was cold as frost. Abandoned and helpless, the carp clambered forward on all fours, ignoring the blood as his hands, so glaringly red, clutched at the snow. He sobbed until his breathing hitched, only to see Jinglin receding into the distance. One heart-wrenching burst after another, he howled, his young vocal cords hoarse from the strain. "You can't! Jinglin!" The carp trembled. "I beg you, please, don't leave me." In a seeming misstep, he tumbled back down the stairs. There, he lay in the snow, his vision blurred with tears, while resentful whimpers escaped through his clenched teeth. With injured fingers sticky with blood, he clutched the snow and turned over to stand up. He wiped his eyes, smearing blood and tears all over his hands. He was a lost child at his wits' end, merely standing there, wailing loudly as he watched Jinglin depart. His vocalizations were loud enough to topple the snow off the branches of the cedar trees beside the stairs. The falling snow mingled with the dense fog to conceal Jinglin's silhouette from view. Now only his cries echoed in the air, causing curious spirits and beasts to stick out their heads. The carp was tired of crying. Jinglin was gone. A boar emerged from a mass of snow and sniffed its way towards the carp. The boar was so huge it looked like a moving mountain, clearly the result of some level of cultivation. Circling around the carp, it asked in a low, muffled voice, "You want to go with him? But you have no idea who he is." The carp stopped crying, but his eyes were red and swollen. "None of your business," he retorted. The boar snorted and shoved the fish down with its snout. "It is my business, since this mountain's under my charge. Why must you pester the most cold-hearted being in the world? All immortals are the same. Best leave him alone. It'll be better for you to associate with the other spirits here. You were just a fish to begin with, anyway." "I said, none of your business." The carp ran a few paces ahead and struggled up the steps. He hesitated briefly before throwing away the snow jacket that he had on, even tearing at his cloak until it was a mess. He shivered uncontrollably in the freezing wind, and inhaled deeply before following in Jinglin's footsteps. Why did he strip? A goshawk, poking its head out, asked the boar below, "Is he not cold?" Strange things happen when one evolves to human form. The boar tugged at the snow jacket with its mouth. Very strange things. While the spirits and beasts around chimed in, the carp ventured further into the mountains. He could not move quickly, and it had begun to snow lightly. Trudging through the snow, he felt his toes had become stones. Icicles hung off the cedar trees, and the creek babbled. The more the snow fell, the denser the fog became. No matter how far the carp walked, he could not reach the end. The carp did not understand how Jinglin could have been so cruel. It was as though Jinglin had no heart. He considered leaving for good so that Jinglin would regret his decision, but despite his thoughts, he did not turn away. Gradually, the carp stopped breathing through his mouth because the gale was so cold and piercing that he feared his lips and tongue would freeze. He could no longer express his emotions as freely, for his face had been cast into a downcast expression by the wind like a carved mask. His limbs were so stiff that he could not even bend his fingers. He had lost track of time when he felt a sudden but gentle puff of air on his ear. He shifted his gaze sluggishly and saw a face floating in the air. Its silvery hair fluttered in the wind, the tips gradually fading into snow. "Are you trying to reach Cicada Haven?" the voice probed. "You won't get there like this. Jinglin has hidden his residence away in an elusive place." It breathed in the carp's ear. "You'll never, ever find it." The fish could sense an evil aura from the entity. "None of your damn business." His eyelashes and hair were coated in frost and snow, revealing a feral nature not to be trifled with. He could see the spirit sneer through the snow. Its limbs were all but transparent since its low cultivation could not allow it to maintain human form. Floating comfortably in the wind, it followed the carp. "Jinglin's abandoned you, just as he abandoned the many fish before you," the snow spirit whispered. "You don't know who he is, but I do. I'll tell you all about him." The carp whipped his head up, interest piqued not by the last utterance. "He had many fish before? No, you're lying. I'm clearly the only one he has." The spirit giggled and rolled around. "Believe it or not. He's so cold and distant, not to mention bedridden with a grave illness. He's all alone in his dwelling. Surely, even he might find it too lonely. Even he doesn't like being alone." "I don't believe you." Yet the carp's footsteps slowed. He shook his head vigorously. "I'm the only one Jinglin has." "If you were the only one, why would he cast you away?" the snow spirit drawled. "Why would he leave you and never even look back? How could he be so cruel and heartless? You were together each and every day for years. Even though you're a fish, shouldn't he have the slightest sense of sentimentality? Yet the fickler and more ungrateful he is." The snow spirit's stone changed, and it cackled. "The more you want to tear him apart, devour him whole, and stuff him into your belly. What a greedy little spirit you are." The snow spirit was right on the mark, and its words sent the carp flying into a shameful rage. "Mind your own business." The snow spirit drifted over to the other side of the fish. "What are you afraid of? You must have not wanted Jinglin to know because you feared he'd think of you as a common spirit who's insatiably greedy by nature." It chuckled and whispered, "You shouldn't be afraid. You have no idea how much more ruthless and heartless he is compared to any other spirit. Once upon a time, he killed his liege and father, along with many others during the massacre in the Court of Immortality. Have you ever witnessed the world awash in crimson, like that of the setting sun? That was the scene in the court when Jinglin committed the massacre. Besides, he had butchered countless spirits. His sword is tainted with the bones of spirits and the blood of immortals. He's a bloodthirsty being, who everyone spurns, hates, and fears." The carp rubbed his frozen cheeks with no trace of surprise or fear. "You're making so much noise I can't tell where I'm going." He shooted impatiently. Go away. The snow spirit floated around the carp. Aren't you afraid of him? Then it came to its own answer. Ah, it must be his appearance that has deceived you. That face of his is deadlier than any guise in the world. So you find him good-looking, too, the fish taunted, to which the snow spirit answered grudgingly. I'd like to peel his face off and put it over mine. If I had his looks, the 3 realms would be my playground. Then its tone turned ominous. How abhorrent of him to imprison me here, trapping me for centuries. He's afraid I'll spread the word that he's still alive. He's afraid that... Well, he's a nobody now. Listen, little spirit, if you really want to eat him, I can lend you a hand. As expected, it saw the carp's eyes light up before he reined in his emotions and pretended not to care. You have to agree even if you don't want to, the snow spirit gloated. I've already disclosed Jinglin's past to you. You've heard it, so you're bound to me. If you want to live, you must do as I say. The color drained from the carp's face. You devious villain! You won't suffer as long as you obey, and you can even obtain Jinglin's spiritual energy for free. You want it, don't you? As long as you eat him, there's no way he can abandon you again. The carp hesitated for a moment. Are you telling the truth? I don't want to be bound to you. Unless I die, no one can extricate you from this bond. You have to do as I say. Although I can't kill you, I can trap you in the ice so you may never walk out again. The spirit studied the carp coolly and was satisfied that it struck some fear in him. The spirit chuckled. Behave yourself, and I'll show you the way back. Cicada Haven was enshrouded in thick fog and snow. By the time the carp caught sight of it from afar, the wound on his forehead had become so numb from the cold that it no longer hurt. Crouching on the carp's back, the snow spirit whispered, You must hide the herb I gave you. Even an immortal would suffer great pain and be rendered immobilized after ingesting it, but you don't know Jinglin's prowess. We cannot let our guard down, even if he can't move. I'll guide you on what to do after he swallows it. The carp looked ahead and exhaled. Does it work on spirits, too? The snow spirit rolled its eyes at the sudden question. Don't try anything funny. It won't work on me. Would I have given it to you if it did? The cold air around the carp's neck tightened until his skin turned red from the freezing grip. The fish snorted and trotted ahead to reach the last step. Stony was sitting under the eaves, shaking its legs and ringing the copper bell, when its gaze fell upon the distressed fish standing at the entrance. Flabbergasted, it jumped to its feet and ran over to him, circling him as if looking at some strange creature. The carp kicked it and sent it staggering. Have you already forgotten me? He spat, eyes pitifully red and swollen. You and your master both have hearts of stone. Stony tumbled into the snow before sitting up, made a snowball, and flung it at the carp. The latter did not dodge or evade the attack. Are you going in with me? The carp asked the snow spirit. Jinglin should be sleeping. The snow spirit studied Stony as if trying to puzzle something out. Hearing the carp's words, it urged, It's now or never. Take me inside. Stony tossed a snowball up and down as it watched the carp walk past it. However, it neither blocked the carp's way, nor rose to its feet. The snow spirit had found Stony unusual upon reaching the residence, and now it was clear that the stone figure was no gatekeeper either. Then it dawned on the spirit, and it cried out in alarm, It's a... The carp tripped over the threshold and fell headlong into the bedchamber. The wooden floor seemed to be protected by a spiritual barrier, because the snow spirit began to sizzle as soon as it touched the planks. Fool! Get me on your back, the snow spirit berated. To its dismay, the carp tripped over a small table and fell onto its partially formed body. By the time the spirit realized something was amiss, The carp was already pinning it against the floor. The planks were so hot that the snow spirit wanted to scream, only for a clump of herbs to be stuffed into its mouth. A hand clasped over its mouth, and the herb went down its throat. The scalding heat was melting it, not to mention the pain inside its stomach. Before rolling over, the carp whispered in its ear, "Thanks." The carp then retreated, frantically climbing onto the bed and throwing himself into Jinglin's arms. He sobbed while trembling viciously. "Jinglin, Jinglin, I'm scared." The insides of the snow spirit churned violently. It crashed into the threshold, on the verge of melting away. Its expression was savage as it howled in dismay. You deceitful spirit." Frowning, Jinglin woke up to see the carp shivering, nestled against him. The fish had lost most of his clothing, only wearing a shirt. Clearly, it had not been an easy journey back to Cicada Haven. The abrasion on his forehead had scabbed over, and he had yet to wipe away the blood from his face. Jinglin could once again see himself reflected in those limpid, innocent eyes. Seeing that Jinglin had woken up, the carp withdrew his hands meekly. "Jinglin." His eyes glistened with tears. "Jinglin." Stony squashed the snowball in its hands, dumbfounded by the events it had witnessed. The shrills of the snow spirit made it difficult for Jinglin to compose himself. With a wave, he cast the spirit outwards. When it fell into the snow, the cold eased its suffering somewhat. It was terrified of Jinglin and did not wish to linger. Despite the pain, it transformed into a gust of snow and beat a hasty retreat. The carp covered his face as he wailed. Jinglin felt a splitting headache coming on. Unable to even lift the carp away, he could only partially close his eyes and wonder aloud, "Why are you so heavy?" The carp looked up at Jinglin's pale, weary face. He looked even more sickly than last night. He did not know exactly where and how Jinglin had been injured, nor did he understand why Jinglin had suddenly become so frail, but his heart ached a little. He raised his hands to cup Jinglin's cheeks. "Jinglin," the carp murmured through sobs, "don't die." He was only a small child. Hands around Jinglin's face, he felt overwhelmed with sadness, and he began to cry again. As he had the appearance of a chubby, adorable boy, it was a heartbreaking sight for anyone to watch the large teardrops roll off his cheeks. "I am but a dead man," Jinglin replied, his eyelids heavy. "How can that be?" The carp jerked his head up, bumping against Jinglin's jaw in the process, and practically drowned him with tears. Jinglin felt his collar getting soaked as the tears slid across his neck and seeped into the pillow. He suddenly felt a sense of being alive, as if those scalding droplets had stirred up ripples in a long dead and desolate world. It had been a very long time since he was this close, or spoke this casually to anyone. "Why do you cry so much?" Jinglin's voice gradually dropped to a whisper. "You were not born aware of the world, but reaching sentience was written in your fate. However, your destiny does not lie here. Leave and travel to the vast world beyond. Like a fledgling leaving its cage, you'll come to understand that remaining here, you will exist like the living dead. But can't I just stay with you?" Seeing how naive the carp was, Jinglin resisted his fatigue and repeated the words he had said that morning in a slightly mocking tone. "You have the gall to say that, knowing who I am." "But I don't even know who I am. I've never even had a name." Jinglin appeared to be asleep, but he spoke after a moment. "Let's call you Tang Ji." The carp wanted to continue chatting, but Jinglin's breathing grew softer as he truly fell asleep. Once Jinglin was asleep, it was impossible to wake him up. If not for the rising and falling of his torso, one might have believed that he had died. Stony suddenly leapt up with vigor, entered the bedchamber, and climbed up the bed to look at the carp, who had long since dropped the act. He dragged Stony off the bed to one side. Forget what you've seen and heard. I didn't know that spirit or what it was doing here. Don't feed Jinglin any nonsense." Holding on to Stony to prevent it from running off, he threatened, "I'll throw you into the pond if you so much as think about tattling." Stony was pinned against the edge of the small table, and its feet could barely reach the ground. The figure nodded eagerly, and the carp released it. "Stop calling me fish or carp or whatever. My name is now Tang Ji." Not that Stony could speak, anyway. It just went along and nodded with enthusiasm. Tang Ji felt good being obeyed. Grasping his sleeves, he said, "I want to wash up." Stony prepared some water, with which Tang Ji wet his handkerchief and wiped the filth away. The wound on his forehead felt cool and painless. He looked at his reflection in the basin for a moment, then asked Stony, "He really didn't look back? I fell so hard. Maybe it didn't look bad enough?" Stony kicked him in the shin, leaving Tang Ji hissing and hopping around in pain. "You didn't look back either. You and Jinglin are the same." Stony enjoyed watching his suffering, so it kicked his other shin too. Tang Ji wrestled it to the ground and grabbed the grass crown on its head. "Watch it. I'm much stronger than you now that I have a human form. You have to listen to me." Stony headbutted him so hard that it dazed him. In retaliation, Tang Ji mussed up its grass crown. Both of them tumbled around on the ground, wrestling with one another, even knocking the table over. Finally, Tang Ji rolled over onto his back, panting. "I'm hungry. Jinglin can't be eaten in his present state. I need to find something else." Tang Ji kicked Stony and climbed to his feet. "Let's go look around." Meanwhile, Ah Yi, the five-colored bird, had been unable to shapeshift, and could only remain in bird form as he searched for food in the mountains. He was accustomed to luxury and had no interest in consuming insects, so he drove out some birds, took over their nest among the pine trees, and seized the food that they had stocked up for winter. Outraged, they attempted to drive him away. Ah Yi despised the other birds, finding them stupid and their plumage dull-looking. When he had slept enough, he would even kick the chicks in the nest that were crying out to be fed before he flew off, unabashed, in search of water. Tang Ji was bundled up again in woolen clothes as he followed Stony out and picked some mushrooms. Since the fish wanted to eat meat, they went through the thick forest and dug through the snow in search of small animals. Tang Ji parted the shrubs and poked his head out. He saw from afar a bright, colorful bird drinking water by a stream with its tail sticking out. It looked extremely familiar. "Isn't that Ah Yi?" Tang Ji pressed Stony down until it was buried in the snow while it struggled desperately. He motioned for it to keep quiet and glanced at Ah Yi. He saw the bird preening its wings rather haughtily. It must be him. Tang Ji bared his teeth and said to Stony, "You stay here and wait for my signal. I'll call for you when I've pinned him." He removed his cloak, folded it, and set it aside before crawling over. Ah Yi was admiring himself by the water. He felt his color was so uniquely gorgeous that not even a phoenix could compare. The more he gazed at himself, the more absorbed he became, completely overlooking the fact that someone was approaching from behind. Unable to control himself, Ah Yi moved closer to the water to take a better look. Such feathers! Before he could finish praising himself, he was kicked in the behind. Caught off guard, he fell into the water. The stream was shallow, but it was icy. Wings sodden, he flailed about in the water. Insolent fool! The audacity! Water splashed everywhere as Ah Yi was grabbed by the foot. Tang Ji was now much stronger than the bird, and he easily dragged Ah Yi onto land. The bird flapped his wings, trying to escape, but Tang Ji sat on him. "What's the meaning of this, you fool? Answer me," Ah Yi fumed. After pinning him in place, Tang Ji told Stony to come and shove the bird's head into the snow, which it was more than happy to do, going as far as to straddle Ah Yi's long neck. Unable to break free, the bird could only spit, "How dare you? You're a dead fish walking." Facing Ah Yi's tail, Tang Ji counted the feathers on it. He tugged at one and snorted. "What did you say? I didn't hear you." "If you pluck my feathers, I'll make you regret that you were ever born," Ah Yi lashed out. "Oh, is that so?" A thought struck Tang Ji. "Tell me what sort of history your sister has with Jinglin, and I'll reconsider plucking your feathers." "Bah! Who are you to be asking about my sister? Dream on." Tang Ji yanked out a long feather and brandished it. Its colors were so vibrant that they were dazzling. Ah Yi cried out in pain, not expecting him to actually go through with his threat. "You'll regret this," Ah Yi howled. "I'll scrape off all your scales and make you—" Tang Ji seized another one. "Are you going to tell me or not?" Ah Yi choked in anger, but he braced himself. "No, I won't. You can kill me, but you'll have to answer to my sister." "You're so weird. You've already evolved and amassed spiritual energy, yet you still cry for your sister. You don't seem like a cock at all." Perplexed, Tang Ji parted his tail feathers. "More like a hen." Ah Yi was blind with rage. "Well, I'm not curious about your sister. Just tell me about Jinglin." "I know nothing." "How is the water, by the way?" Tang Ji threatened. "If you don't tell me, I'll pluck out all your feathers and soak you in the stream for a few days before you see your dear sister. Though, I wonder if your sister will recognize a bald chicken." He spoke harshly and meant every word that he said. Tang Ji knew nothing about social etiquette. He only understood that he should do whatever he wanted. If someone told him that the powers that be did not permit such or such, he would dismiss the authority of these so-called powers that be. Who were these powers, and on what grounds could they deny him the freedom to do as he liked? Tang Ji dragged Ah Yi to the edge of the water. Trapped in the snow, Ah Yi gritted his teeth in panic. "Stop it. I'll tell you. Just remember, you asked for it." "Cut the crap." Tang Ji kicked him impatiently. "Promise me that you'll let me go and stay away from me after I tell you." Ah Yi struggled with his wings. "I promise." Tang Ji sat backwards on top of Ah Yi and propped his cheeks up with his hands. "I always keep my word." Ah Yi calmed himself down before speaking. "My sisters always regarded him with veneration and fear. She told me nothing except to call him Jyoga, but I knew there must have been more to it, so I made a special trip to the Middle Realm, where Chronicles of Gods was stored, to find out more. Only one person bears the name Jinglin in this world, and it's none other than Lord Lin Song, the deity who committed regicide 500 years ago." He deliberately paused, rather pleased with himself. He wanted Tang Ji to admit that he was scared. Even if the fish had not known the name Jinglin, Lord Lin Song was known far and wide. 5 centuries ago, the crisis he started had brought instability to the 3 realms for countless years. The celestial warriors were nearly wiped out, and their leader, Li Rong, known by his title Lord Sha Ge, fell into slumber because of it. Had Lord Chung Tian not sought help from the true Buddha, they would not have been able to take down Lord Lin Song. Unfortunately for Ah Yi, Tang Ji was unfamiliar with the reputed figures of the world. Consequently, he was utterly unafraid. He kicked Ah Yi again to prompt him to continue. "I've already told you everything," Ah Yi raged. "Stop kicking me." "That's all?" Tang Ji frowned. "That's all you know?" "It's a crime severe enough for any entity of the Middle Realm to face execution. Just how ignorant are you? Nobody in the Court of Immortality would have sided with Jinglin after he'd killed the Supreme Father. He clearly died then, yet he's still alive. Humph, I wasn't born yesterday, you know. He must have achieved the great accomplishment stage by then. Do you know what that means? Jinglin had been ranked Celestial Lord, and there were no more than 6 individuals in the world worthy of the title Lord. Lord Jiu Qing was the supreme who established the court and was both Jinglin's father and his liege. After Jinglin killed him, the number of lords dropped from 6 to 4. The only other one who's achieved the great accomplishment stage is Lord Sha Ge, Li Rong. I wouldn't be surprised if Jinglin hadn't perished that day because he'd reached that stage. Why is that not surprising? Tang Ji asked. Because those who have reached the great accomplishment stage do not perish. They live as long as heaven exists. Yi lowered his voice. But I think he's a fake because he's not the least powerful. They once praised him to the skies, but look at him now. His expanse of spiritual energy is near empty, and he looks like he's reaching the end of his lifespan. After hanging on for so long, he's just an invalid. He's timid and cowardly, not even leaving the mountains all these years. What's the point of living like this? He might as well be dead. He had yet to finish talking when his head was smacked a few times, the force of it nearly sending him into the snow. Stony was stepping on his head. Then it stomped on him several more times as if to vent its resentment. Yi was furious, but too afraid to express it. He could only continue. My sister was a 5-colored bird originally under Lord Lin Song's command, so that's why she knows him. I've finished talking. Now scram. To the bird's dismay, Tang Ji shot him a sinister look. Scram? What made you think it'd be so easy? You're a shameless brat who fed me to a snake. Why the heck would I let you off the hook so easily? You promised, Yi spat. Don't touch me. Stop. You... Fu Li Jie. Jinglin, help. Tang Ji kicked his shoes off and opened the door to the bedchamber. His cheeks were flushed from having been running about, and he was sweating all over. Sadly, the bedchamber was even hotter. Jinglin was still asleep. Tang Ji climbed onto the bed and held his breath as he watched Jinglin, exhaling only when he was confident that Jinglin would not wake up. Stony came stomping in, shook off the feathers from its head, and climbed up after him. How long will he sleep for? Tang Ji asked. Naturally, Stony could not answer. Tang Ji removed his outer layers, wanting to snuggle up to Jinglin. He had only lifted the corner of the blanket when Stony grabbed the back of his collar. He looked back. You're not sleeping beside him. Go sleep outside like you always do. Stony trod on Tang Ji's back and pulled him away from Jinglin, but the carp was unwilling, holding onto Jinglin's neck and forcibly squeezing himself next to the sleeping figure. He glared at Stony, disregarding their feather-plucking camaraderie. Truly a fair-weather friend. Tang Ji felt Stony butting its head against his back. The sharp pain made him grimace, but he did not want to make a sound. He could only leave Stony to do as it wished. It was terribly hot in the room, but Jinglin did not sweat at all. Tang Ji closed his eyes, tempted by the neck right under his nose. Even though he had had a full meal, he wanted to take a bite of Jinglin's flesh. Stony punched the fish from behind, which hurt and surprised him, but it also cut his desire short. He licked his teeth and touched Jinglin's neck. He supposed he would not be able to rip off Jinglin's flesh in his current state, and thought how nice it would be if he could grow up a little more. However, the strange thing was that he was a fish, not a beast. He should not have been so ravenous for meat, nor should he have been so clear about which part of a body was the most vulnerable. Yet such knowledge was embedded in him like natural instincts, so much so that even he found it odd. Was he really a fish? Tang Ji's mind wandered, searching blindly, before finally drifting off to sleep. When the fog of night receded, the snow stopped. The bell under the eaves shook as urgent and persistent knocking came from the doors. Tang Ji curled up towards the warmth beneath him. He was reluctant to wake up, but the person outside would not stop knocking. Clinging to Jinglin, he mumbled, "Who's there?" The person at the door called out, "Jioga." Starting, Tang Ji was wide awake, having recognized the late-night visitor to be Fu Li. He had just plucked out her little brother's tail feathers, causing the bird such shame and resentment with his newfound baldness that he wanted to die. Hence, Tang Ji kept his eyes peeled as he climbed out of bed and put on his robe. "What's the matter?" Fu Li saw the bedchamber doors open and a head poke through the gap. With some urgency, she asked, "Is Jioge still asleep?" "Fast asleep, and he won't wake up even if you shake him." Tang Ji acted naively while warily observing her. Convinced that she was not here to avenge Ah Yi, he continued, "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? I can't promise when Master will wake up." Sure enough, he heard Fu Li answer, "I'm afraid I have to give the tea a miss. Open the doors and let me in." "Can't you enter?" Tang Ji asked. Fu Li's expression froze, and her eyes glassed over. "His spiritual barriers protect this residence. I can't even touch you, let alone enter the bedchamber." The bell under the eaves shook again. Fu Li took a step forward. "This is bad news. The East Sea boundary keeper's here. This place is no longer safe. Quick, open up." Tang Ji noticed the salty tang of the sea rapidly saturating the air. The sound of pounding waves was growing louder as an invisible wave of power surged towards them. The starry sky suddenly darkened. Looking up, Tang Ji realized it was not dark clouds overhead, but a massive creature making its way through the sky. Fu Li knew it was too late. With a sharp spin, she revealed her true form, which could have humbled even Ah Yi. Sending out ripples of brilliant light through the night, she was so dazzling she almost eclipsed the brilliance of the constellations. With a bat of her wings, she sent Tang Ji flying into the room, shut the doors and windows, and enveloped the entire residence in snow. Fu Li soared into the sky and let out a shrill. The massive object in the air followed the sound, revealing its head from behind the clouds. This was a genuine flood dragon. Could it be? The guardian of the Canli tree had left her post without authorization to come to the East Sea coast. "What matters of importance do you have here?" the flood dragon questioned. "Zongyin," Fu Li spiraled through the clouds. "You've remained in the East Sea for a century without leaving it once, devoting yourself solely to cultivation. The Dragon Gate has yet to appear for you to leap over and reach dragonhood, yet here you are on an unauthorized inspection. What business do you have here?" "I am in charge of the East Sea, and it's my duty to inspect my land." Zongyin's eyes flashed dangerously. "I've been frank with you, and I hope you'll also give me a straight answer. What are you doing here? This desolate mountain is barren of spiritual energy, so you wouldn't have chosen such a place for cultivation and seclusion." "I am the guardian of Canli, and wherever the tree points me to is where I shall oversee. I find it surprising as well. The only aberrations in the stars came from this place, so I hurried here without any rest, but it turns out you're the cause." Zongyin scrutinized her. "Do not attempt to deceive me, Fu Li. A snowstorm broke out here this morning, and a snow spirit by the name of Snowling informed the Demarcation Bureau that evil was lurking here. Evil beings are no trivial matter, so I must go through this place with a fine comb. You're also a member of the Court of Immortality, so you're well aware of the severe consequences of an evil incursion. Do not stray from the good path, Fu Li. Now leave." 5 centuries ago, when Lord Lin Song was carving a bloody path up to the court, Zongyin had been at a critical stage of his evolution into a flood dragon. Thus, he did not witness the massacre. His knowledge came from Lord Chengtian, who said that Lord Lin Song had been tainted by evil and was reaping the fruits of his misdeeds. The snow spirits are known to be cunning, greedy, and overly fond of inciting trouble. Why would you believe the words of such a despicable being? Fu Li argued. "I cannot leave while the stars remain unstable. Do not hinder me from carrying out my duties, Zongyin." Gliding through the air, the flood dragon bellowed. "There must be a reason why you don't want me inspecting this place." As he said those words, the flood dragon shape-shifted into a man and dived towards the ground. Fu Li spread her 5-colored wings and cut through the sky in pursuit. Landing on one knee, Zongyin noticed that spiritual energy abounded. Standing up, He looked towards the courtyard. To think that there is a spirit of this level of cultivation here, yet you're trying to hide it instead of reporting its presence. We'd be held accountable should the Lord investigate. Fu Li attempted to obstruct him by raising the winds, only to discover that he was a thorny adversary. Had it been anyone other than Zhong Yin, she could have relied on countermeasures, but it just had to be him. In all of the Middle Realm, Zhong Yin was the most loyal to Lord Chengtian. The flood dragon was so upright and tenacious that he would not give up until he had uncovered the complete truth. The snow and winds rushed at his face, but Zhong Yin waved his hand to send them swirling in the opposite direction. The pine groves shook violently, and snow toppled all over as the mountain began quaking. Tang Ji could not see outside, but he felt a great tremor underfoot, which made him feel dizzy and nauseous. The sleeping Jinglin slipped towards the floor, but Tang Ji hugged him tight and dragged him back to the bed, only to stagger and tumble off the bed with him the next moment. Tables and chairs strewn in the room collided and crashed into him, igniting a fire of frustration in him. He wished he could bite the perpetrator to death. Gradually, Tang Ji found it hard to maintain his grip on Jinglin, so he crouched to protect Jinglin's head. He hissed through clenched teeth, "I can't let someone else taste your blood before I do." A small table smashed into his back, pinning him down and making it hard for him to breathe. His hands were occupied, so he could only bear it. Amidst the mayhem in the room, he caught sight of Stony deftly dodging the debris as it came to his side. Tang Ji almost choked out of frustration. "Stop playing around. Help me up." Limbs outstretched for balance, Stony stepped on Tang Ji's arm to climb onto his shoulder, pressing the carp down even lower. "Who told you to step on my head?" Tang Ji fumed. Stony stomped on him, forcing Tang Ji even closer to Jinglin. Despite the ordeal they were in, his mind wandered. Jinglin looked so alluring when he was asleep, but when he opened his eyes, he was an entirely different person. If he were to remain unconscious forever, the fish thought it wouldn't be. "What are you doing?" Tang Ji gritted his teeth. As though aware of the carp's thoughts, Stony started tugging at a lock of his hair. Then, the weight on Tang Ji's back disappeared as the small table came off him, but before he could breathe out in relief, the room was flipped around. Unable to find anything out of the ordinary, Zhong Yin decided to flip the entire mountain upside down. Even Jinglin's spiritual barrier would not be able to withstand this blow. The residents sat atop a mountain, so they would be at the very bottom if it were flipped over. With the weight of the entire mountain on them, Tang Ji did not want to take the risk of Jinglin's barrier breaking, no matter how strong it was supposed to be. What if Jinglin could not handle it and the spiritual barrier shattered? They would be instantly crushed to a bloody pulp. Fu Li stomped on the ground, jolting the mountain back into its original position. Beasts and birds alike scattered and fled in distress. "Are you trying to kill all the beings here? Cease your actions at once." The pounding of the tide rang through the air. "I know what I'm doing. Step aside," Zhong Yin demanded. "How can I step aside and watch you behave like this?" With a sweep of her tail, she raised a violent gale that swept Zhong Yin off the ground and sent him hurtling towards the East Sea. Zhong Yin steadied himself in mid-air and tore the fierce gust apart. Scales flashed all over his arms as he pummeled the ground. The gale receded, vanishing without a trace, while the earth cracked open, toppling the pine grove. "I will see who is hiding here. It must be no ordinary entity for you to be acting so suspiciously. Who is it, Fu Li? Who are you hiding?" He lifted the earth and turned it upside down. Tang Ji crashed into a wall. Aching all over, he gasped for air, powerless to resist as the situation spiraled out of control. Jinglin rolled towards him along with the tremors, his arms falling to his sides. Tang Ji's gaze subconsciously followed Jinglin's arm down to one of his fingertips when he had an idea. He craned his neck, desperately drawing closer to Jinglin's fingertip. "Hey," Tang Ji hissed at Stony. "Give me Jinglin's finger." Just a little closer, and he could touch it, but the earth below was tilting more and more. He could only watch as Jinglin's fingertip swayed before him. This body was useless. It was neither tall nor strong, and there were no other uses for it except to play dumb and act innocent. He wanted to grow. He had to grow. He must grow. The delicate fingertip touched the center of Tang Ji's lips. Without even thinking about it, Tang Ji bit down hard on the digit with his tiny milk teeth, drawing blood. The scarlet liquid tasted like sweet dew in his mouth and slid down his throat, becoming a torrential wave of spiritual energy pouring through Tang Ji. Intense pain racked his body, and his bones creaked as the spiritual energy forced his body to grow. Tang Ji was like a plant in the throes of a sudden and frenzied growth spurt. In the next moment, he found that he could sense so much more in his surroundings. He could see the tiny cracks in the wall, and hear the crashing sea in the distance. Tempestuous waves arose in his expanse of spiritual energy, tormenting him with pain so intense he could not even make a sound. He had no idea how invaluable Jinglin was. It had only been one mouthful of blood, but it was worth more than a century of cultivation. It stimulated his body so violently, but his organs were still intact. Aside from the pain, he was completely unharmed. The rope holding the copper bell under the eaves snapped, and the bell plunged into the snow. Instantaneously, the spiritual barrier faded away to expose a courtyard dwelling that had been concealed from view. Jinglin felt heavier in his arms, and Tang Ji heard a thud behind him. For some reason, Stony had fallen apart into 2 ordinary rocks. But Tang Ji had other things to worry about, for the door behind him was smashed into smithereens before he could even move. An overwhelming sense of oppression drew closer as Zhongyin stepped onto the threshold. "Found you." What he saw was a figure sitting, facing away from him in the shade of the bedchamber, with disheveled hair and clothes barely hanging on his body. When the figure turned to face him, he saw a boy with fierce and insolent eyes. The boy did not mince his words. "Begone." Zhongyin did not blow his top, for that glare gave him an unexpected sense of déjà vu. Tang Ji tightened his arms around Jinglin and picked him up from the floor. Muscles rippling along his back, he resembled a beast, biding its time within the shadows, poised to pounce at any moment. His breathing was like a low, warning growl. Zhongyin moved closer. He was so large in his human form that he blocked out what little light was left. Searching through his memories, he examined Tang Ji. "Who are you?" Zhongyin's presence was so intimidating that it shook Tang Ji's spiritual expanse. Draconic aura saturated the air, leaving Tang Ji cornered with nowhere to escape. Yet the carp had no intention of fleeing. His extreme greed and desire had been rekindled, though he concealed them deep within himself. Tang Ji did not reply. He pulled Jinglin's head into the hollow of his neck, an easy feat for him in his present state. In fact, he needed to exert little force in order to snap Jinglin in half. Displeasure radiated from his eyes as he watched Zhongyin's every move, matching his one-word utterance. "Zhongyin," Fu Li sighed behind him. "As you can see, this isn't an evil being. It's merely a carp that's managed to reach human form. What else do you want?" "That's not right," Zhongyin countered. "You call him a carp, but I saw an inverted scale on his neck. Countless creatures roam the world, but only the dragon is born with an inverted scale. This is no fish." He was sure he would not be mistaken when it came to such an important matter. True dragons and phoenixes had not been sighted for centuries. Even after over a century of tedious cultivation, the flood dragon had yet to see the dragon gate, much less glimpse the invaluable opportunity to leap over it. Hence, he had to remain bound to the East Sea, unable to ascend to the court of immortality. Tang Ji was an oddity. From what Zhongyin could see, Tang Ji was a carp through and through, from his true form to his spiritual expanse, with no sign of dragonhood. More importantly, his eyes were murderous and wild, belonging to one who would not be bound by conventions or rationality. He was clearly a young spirit that had yet to set foot in the real world. How strange! Zhongyin could not help but take a step closer. How strange, indeed! Zhongyin! Fu Li grabbed his arm just in time. You mustn't go further. Have you forgotten what you are? Take a good look again. He's merely a carp. The spiritual energy of this dwelling had been sealed off, not to mention the bedchamber. If you go closer, he won't be able to withstand your spiritual power and will die a violent death. He has not wronged you, so why hurt the innocent? If he truly is but a carp, why must you fight for him so? Zhongyin asked matter-of-factly. Because I owe him this favor. You know how strict the Demarcation Bureau is nowadays. My aid in his cultivation may result in a severe or maybe a light punishment, but it's nevertheless against the rules of the court. Seeing Zhongyin's indecipherable expression, Fu Li sighed and continued hesitantly. You know I used to be a subordinate of Lord Linsong, and our current lord despises him the most. All these years, I've been fearful of incurring his wrath, so naturally I must exercise caution. As for the spirit, do you think you can do me a favor and overlook this on account of our years of camaraderie? Fu Li was the guardian of Tan Li, and the astronomical phenomena of the north all fell under her wing. The 5-colored bird was born after the phoenix, a divine bird designated into service by the late Supreme Father himself. Unlike Zhongyin, Fu Li was a true immortal, who was officially conferred her position in the records of the Court of Immortality. Strictly speaking, she outranked the Flood Dragon. However, it was a known fact that after the roots of the Tanli tree had been damaged, the fledgling Fu Li slumbered, fed and matured under the auspices of Lord Linsong. Therefore, after Lord Linsong had committed treason, she was also implicated and imprisoned in Soulhold, where she was interrogated by Lord Chengtian. Eventually, it was determined that Lord Linsong had acted alone, which spared her life, but also stripped her of her glorious standing in the court. Noting her sincerity, Zhongyin eyed Cangji again. He had suspected that Fu Li was hiding an unpardonable villain, but he had to admit that he did not recognize Tang Ji. Although the spirit was a bit brazen, he had not committed any crimes. But there was still the inverted scale. I doubt you're doing this just to help. No creature's been able to reach dragonhood for ages, and the Dragon Gate hasn't presented itself to me either for over a century. I think you may have taken a special interest in him because of that scale of his. I know you've been deeply depressed over Lord Linsong's ordeal, and determined to prove his innocence. But a word of caution to you, Fu Li. You saw with your own eyes how he beheaded the late Supreme Father in front of the Buddha, and wiped out the celestial warriors, leaving the court awash with blood and bodies. Lord Linsong might have once been kind, but he had strayed onto the path of evil. His death is therefore not worth lamenting. You shouldn't harbor any ill feelings towards the Supreme Lord, and attempt to use a true dragon to overthrow the world order. I would never. Fu Li was aghast. How dare you question my loyalty? I carry the responsibility for the lives of all who reside in the Tanli tree. How could I ever face those under my care as a treacherous rebel? If you don't believe me, feel free to hand me over to the authorities. I have already experienced Soulhold. I have nothing to fear. Zhongyin finally stepped back from the doorway. I can look the other way today, but this spirit can no longer stay on the coast of the East Sea. If you want to help, lead him onto the right path. He's unruly by nature from what I've observed. He will cause a calamity if he sets foot on the wrong path. Take him away, Fu Li. With a stern expression, Fu Li brought her hands together in a gesture of gratitude. Tang Ji was just about to get up when Zhongyin spoke again. He may leave with you, but the being in his arms must stay. Tang Ji's gaze shifted. Don't even think about it, he rasped. He's mine. Why should I give him to you? Yours? Your meal, you mean? Zhongyin asked. Tang Ji stiffened, Jinglin still tightly in his arms. Meanwhile, Zhongyin remained where he was, barring the way out. Sensing the situation deteriorating, Fu Li made to speak when Zhongyin looked askance at her. I can understand going to this extent for a fish, but to make such demands for a man, why is that? Do you associate with mankind, too? There are no mortals at the foot of the Canli tree, as far as I know. I've already allowed you to take the fish away, but you want the man, too? Fu Li maintained her composure and cast a few glances at Tang Ji. If it really were a man, I wouldn't have any issue leaving him with you. But it's just a piece of stone, sculpted into the likeness of a human. Silly carp, there's no need to conceal it anymore. Show what you're holding to the boundary keeper. No way. Tang Ji gingerly buried his head in Jinglin's hair. It's mine. I'm not showing it to anyone. What if he falls in love with its appearance and insists on seizing it? I'm no match for him. You have no reason to worry. I've never believed in love. Tang Ji scoffed. You've already caused me plenty of distress, because you think your status and cultivation justify your tyrannical actions. Have you not considered that you're making yourself an enemy? I've merely developed a fondness for a rock, yet you insist on seeing it? Is this how immortals behave? Are you always this rude? Do not engage in meaningless arguments with me. Show me now. Tang Ji lifted the hair on the side of Jinglin's face, revealing a vague outline underneath. Zhongyin could only see his profile, but his complexion was so fair and captivating that it was almost alienating. Tang Ji had his palm pressed against Jinglin's back. In that painfully long moment, he almost believed Jinglin to be dead. Head drooping to the side, the beautiful figure lay motionless, entirely at Tang Ji's disposal. There was not the slightest warmth to his body, his skin resembling lifeless porcelain. Tang Ji's heart thumped uncontrollably, and he was hit by a wave of alarm and uncertainty. Was Jinglin awake or dead? Fu Li took a step forward and snapped. What could you possibly want with the rock? I sculpted it for the silly carp to play with so he wouldn't stir up trouble in the mortal realm. Zhongyin held his silence when he saw her on the verge of tears. He was skeptical, but he would surely not voice his suspicions to Fu Li. He stared at Tang Ji for a moment before speaking. My apologies. I'm just doing my job as the boundary keeper. You may leave. But Fu Li did not feel relief. Given what she knows about Zhongyin's character, this incident had certainly aroused his suspicions. He had no reason to arrest them at the moment, but he would investigate secretly. She had no other options, unfortunately. The longer they stayed there, the more parties would get involved, and the more difficult it would be to extract themselves from this predicament. I'll take this courtyard with me and leave no trace. We won't put you in a difficult position, Fu Li reassured. With a nod, Zhongyin stepped back and shape-shifted into a flood dragon. Before taking to the skies, he addressed Tang Ji. I do not know why you were born with an inverted scale, but I suspect that you aren't far from dragonhood. Behave yourself, or there shall be bloodshed when we next meet. Tang Ji did not look, and perhaps he was not even listening. As soon as Zhongyin left, Fu Li quickly came close and gaped at the state Jinglin was in. Jioge! Brows furrowed, Jinglin opened his eyes and began coughing up blood. His breathing was weak, as his chest began to heave anew, and the iciness in his limbs began fading away. In a mere century, the little snake that once frolicked under his auspices had become so powerful that the earth-flipping commotion had almost exposed him. Tang Ji met Jinglin's gaze before he could adjust his expression. The orbs that stared back were filled with unsettling frost. Luckily, Tang Jiu was endowed with stunning eyes that were piercing and haughty when unsmiling, but brimming with warmth and liveliness when he smiled. So he did his best to light up his eyes with earnestness, and grasped one of Jinglin's hands in his palm. "I was so scared. I thought you'd never wake up," Tang Ji said with downcast eyes. Tang Ji's grip on Jinglin's hand was so tight that Jinglin thought it would crack, and he could not break free. Wary of Fu Li, Tang Ji was trying to hide the bite wound on Jinglin's hand. Given Jinglin's temperament, the carp was certain he would not ask Fu Li for help. As expected, the corners of Jinglin's lips curved slightly into a wry smile. "You've sure grown a lot while I was asleep." Tang Ji picked him up. "That's right. You have nothing to worry about now. I'll be good to you, just like how you've been to me." "There's no need for that." Jinglin allowed Tang Ji to carry him. It was a gift. Fu Li picked up on the signs. "What did you give him, Jioge? Since you're still in recovery, you could leave the fish in my care if you want." Eyes half-lidded, Jinglin gave an indolent reply. "I'm afraid you can't afford to feed him." Realization dawning on Fu Li, she turned towards Tang Ji and spat. "You did what?" "The gall of you to consume his flesh and blood. You were only a child the last time I saw you. No wonder you've matured so much physically and mentally in such a short period of time." With Jinglin snug in his arms, Tang Ji nimbly evaded her. "This is a misunderstanding. It was an urgent situation, and I had no other choice. None of us would have survived if that damn flood dragon had gotten a clear look." He leaned down to take in the smell of Jinglin's hair. "Besides, I respect and adore Jinglin. I yearn to cradle him gently in my arms every day and pamper him. I wouldn't even think about taking another bite." At least, not until Tang Ji was fully prepared for a quick and clean getaway. Fu Li noticed that the carp was totally different from when he was a child, both physically and mentally. This was no ordinary spirit. The problem was that Jinglin did not seem to be a hostage, so she was uncertain how to proceed. All she knew was that she could not jump out of the pan into the fire. "Let me take care of him, and I'll forget about what you've done today." "No." Tang Ji did not want to antagonize Fu Li, so he said, "I mean, everything I've said is true. If you don't believe me, you can ask Jinglin who he prefers to hold him." Jinglin looked at Tang Ji, who felt as though the former's gaze was an icy cold hand swiping around his neck. "I've fed him enough to carry me a bit longer." Jinglin shifted his gaze away. "Take me to the walkway." Tang Ji smirked at Fu Li before striding out the door. "What are you looking for?" Fu Li followed closely behind. "I can bring this entire place along, Jioge. We can look after we've arrived at the Canli tree." Jinglin did not answer either of them. His eyes scanned over the eaves. "Where's the bell?" Tang Ji blew at the snapped rope. "Probably fell when that flood dragon turned the mountain upside down." "I can't have it lost," Jinglin said. "I need it back." Tang Ji wanted to tell a joke, but Jinglin did not look amused. He decided to change tactics and lowered his voice. "What? Do you need it to lull yourself to sleep? I never saw you care much about it." Jinglin tilted his chin slightly, beckoning the carp closer. Tang Ji lowered his head towards Jinglin's lips, and found that Jinglin also looked delectable from this angle. "You could devour me now, and all you'll get is a few centuries of cultivation at most," Jinglin said. "What you really want is in that bell." "I barely got a taste, and now I'm a century ahead, so you could be lying for all I know." Tang Ji was not the least anxious. "How do I know you're not leading me up the garden path?" To his surprise, Jinglin gave a light chuckle, his lukewarm breath tickling Tang Ji's earlobe. The carp raised an eyebrow, and the corners of his lips curled up stiffly. "You sure are confident I'll look for it." "Aren't you the one in charge?" Jinglin responded. "I'll do it," Tang Ji whispered. "I'll go wherever you want me to. but only if you tell her to stay away. Tang Ji would not have been able to act as he pleased with Fu Li following them. Now that he knew the benefits of Jinglin's flesh and blood, Jinglin was akin to a piece of meat, dangling before his nose, a temptation too great to abandon in the name of virtues. Moreover, their positions had been reversed. He could hold Jinglin in his arms, or fling him to the ground. He was the one in control now, and the pleasure of looking down instead of up at someone was indescribable. "You have to be led to go the right way," Jinglin said. Tang Ji played dumb. He laced his fingers with Jinglin's and raised their clasped hands. "My dear Jinglin, you can lead me like this, can't you? I can even let you wrap yourself around me if you want." Fu Li shuffled closer after waiting and not getting a response. Tang Ji stepped back and patted Jinglin on the small of his back. "Jinglin," he said, putting on an amiable tone, "did you have something to say to the nice maiden?"